When I reflect, I always act and speak more intelligently. You do, too, I suppose. But to speak truly, I might be less glad of my own son's recovery, if I had one, than I am of yours, and if you don't believe me about that, the shame is yours, not mine. And this malicious brat allows himself even worse jokes with me. He seems to be your protege, so I'm warning you that one fine day, believe me, I shall renounce the further satisfaction of enjoying the honor of his acquaintance. What fault is it of mine? Kolya shouted. However much I insisted that the prince was almost well now, you'd have refused to believe it, because it was far more interesting to imagine him on his deathbed. Will you be staying with us long? Lizaveta Prokofyevna turned to the prince. The whole summer, and perhaps longer. And you're alone? Not married? No, not married. The prince smiled at the naivety of the barbs sent his way. You've no reason to smile, it does happen. I was referring to the dacha. Why didn't you come to stay with us? We have a whole wing empty, however, as you wish. Do you rent it from him? This one? She added in a half-whisper, nodding towards Lebedev. Why is he grimacing all the time? Just then Vera came outside to the terrace, with the baby in her arms as usual. Lebedev, who had been cringing by the chairs, decidedly unable to figure out what to do with himself but terribly reluctant to leave, suddenly fell upon Vera, waved his arms at her to chase her from the terrace, and, forgetting himself, even stamped his feet at her. Is he crazy? Mrs. Epanchin suddenly added. No, he. Drunk, maybe? It's not pretty company you keep, she snapped, taking in the remaining guests at a glance. What a sweet girl, though. Who is she? That's Vera Lukyanovna, the daughter of this Lebedev. Ah. Very sweet. I want to make her acquaintance. But Lebedev, who had heard Lizaveta Prokofyevna's praises, was already dragging his daughter closer in order to introduce her. Orphans, orphans. He dissolved, approaching. And this baby in her arms is an orphan, her sister, my daughter Lubov, born in most lawful wedlock of the newly departed Elena, my wife, who died 6 weeks ago in childbed, as it pleased the Lord, yes, sir, in place of a mother, though she's only a sister and no more than a sister, no more, And you, my dear, are no more than a fool, forgive me. Well, enough, I suppose you realize that yourself? Lizaveta Prokofyevna suddenly snapped in extreme indignation. The veritable truth. Lebedev bowed most respectfully and deeply. Listen, Mr. Lebedev, is it true what they say of you, that you interpret the apocalypse? Asked Aglaya. The veritable truth, 15 years now. I've heard of you. They wrote about you in the newspapers, I believe? No, that was about another interpreter, another one, ma'am. But that one died, and I remained instead of him, said Lebedev, beside himself with joy. Do me a favor, explain it to me one of these days, since we're neighbors. I understand nothing in the apocalypse. I can't help warning you, Aglaya Ivanovna, that it's all mere charlatanism on his part. Believe me, General Ivolgin, who had been waiting as if on pins and needles and wished with all his might to somehow start a conversation, suddenly put in quickly. He sat down beside Aglaya Ivanovna. Of course, dacha life has its rights, he went on, and its pleasures, and the method of such an extraordinary use to carry you in my arms, Aglaya Ivanovna. In truth, for interpreting the apocalypse is an undertaking like any other, and even a remarkably intelligent undertaking, but it seems you are looking at me in astonishment? General Ivolgin. I have the honor of introducing myself. I delighted. I know Varvara Ardalyonovna and Nina Alexandrovna, Aglaya murmured, trying as hard as she could to keep from bursting out laughing. Lizaveta Prokofyevna flared up. Something that had long been accumulating in her soul suddenly demanded to be let out. She could not stand General Ivolgin, with whom she had once been acquainted, but very long ago. You're lying, my dear, as usual, you never carried her in your arms, she snapped at him indignantly. You've forgotten, Maman, he really did, in Fier, Aglaya suddenly confirmed. We lived in Fier then. I was 6 years old, I remember. He made me a bow and arrow, and taught me how to shoot, and I killed a pigeon. Remember, you and I killed a pigeon together? And he brought me a cardboard helmet and a wooden sword then, and I remember it." Adelida cried out. "I remember it, too," Alexandra confirmed. "You all quarreled then over the wounded pigeon and were made to stand in the corner." Adelida stood like this in the helmet and with the sword. The general, in announcing to Aglaia that he had carried her in his arms, had said it just so, only in order to start a conversation, and solely because he almost always started a conversation with young people in that way, if he found it necessary to make their acquaintance. But this time it so happened, as if by design, that he had told the truth and, as if by design, had forgotten that truth himself. So that now, when Aglaia suddenly confirmed that the two of them had shot a pigeon together, his memory suddenly lit up, and he remembered it all himself, to the last detail, as an old person often remembers something from the distant past. It is hard, intruder, outsider, or impostor, to say what in this memory could have had such a strong effect on the poor and, as usual, slightly tipsy general, but he was suddenly extraordinarily moved. I remember it all," he cried. "I was a staff captain then. You were such a tiny, pretty little girl.